If you're a liturgically detail-oriented person, or a liturgical nerd, as I like to call myself, you may notice something a little bit different about the place where our psalm usually is today. And that's an important thing to know and to bring out, because the Psalms, or songs, as they are loosely translated, there are other psalms that did not make it into our Psalter, the book of Psalms, 150 of them to be exact. There are all kinds of other psalms floating around out there that didn't really make it into that particular part of the canon. For example, the Song of Hannah from the book of Samuel. There's the Song of Mary, which we will be hearing about in a couple of weeks. Praises, poetry written in praise of God. And today, in your bulletin, is the Song of Zechariah. So since we're going to be spending 2 weeks with the fellow named John the Baptist, I'm going to focus a little bit more on the backstory. I'm going to focus a little bit more on Zechariah and the leading up to where we are in the gospel today. So first of all, who is Zechariah? Well, the easy answer is, it says it right there in Luke. Zechariah is the father of John the Baptist. John, I am your father. Zechariah. Well, did you know that there are 2 birth narratives in the Gospel of Luke? And the birth narrative of Jesus is the one that gets all the spotlight, of course, on Christmas Eve. But before that, there's the birth narrative of John the Baptist. And it's a really cool story that leads to how John the Baptist came to be. So Zechariah was a priest, and priests were called randomly to do their priestly sacramental things in the temple. They were on shifts, you might say. And one day it happened that it was Zechariah's turn to do his thing in the temple. So Zechariah goes into the temple, and on that particular day, he has a very special visitor. The angel Gabriel visits Zechariah. And the angel tells him that his wife, Elizabeth, would become pregnant and have a son. Gabriel says in verse 3 of chapter 1, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah, for your prayer has been heard. Your wife, Elizabeth, will bear a son, and you will name him John. He will turn many of the people of Israel to the Lord their God." Understandably, Zechariah might be just a little bit freaked out and not quite know how to respond. So Zechariah says this to the angel: "How will I know this is so? For I am an old man, and my wife is getting on in years." Now, one thing we learn about angels is they don't like pushback. They don't want to be cross-examined. They don't want to be questioned. And so Gabriel says, basically, "Hey, do you know who I am? You know who's right in front of you right now? I'm an angel. My name is Gabriel. Perhaps you've heard of me. But now, because you did not believe my words, you will become mute, unable to speak until the day these things occur." Now, this always strikes me as just a little bit harsh, right? Seems a little harsh. A harsh response from the angel Gabriel. But let's look deeper. There's bound to be something else going on of a spiritual nature. Who can say why angels react the way they do? For Elizabeth's entire pregnancy, though, her husband could not speak. Elizabeth might have been overjoyed, right? This is awesome. Thank you, Angel Gabriel. But I have to wonder if there's something just a little more deep going on. Is there some spiritual relevance to this silent season for about to be a dad of a prophet? Is there something spiritually relevant about this spiritual season for Zechariah? And maybe it turns out that the angel is not as harsh as we might think she is. Because maybe God knows that Zechariah might need a little bit of time to prepare for what is to come. Big moments, important moments call for times of quiet. A long period of quiet. Couldn't we all use that right about now, especially now in our world, in our hearts, in our spaces, in our public spaces? What would it be like to commit to the discipline of quiet for a certain period of time? And I wonder what that would feel like for you. Is there spiritual value in silence? Well, many Buddhist and Christian monks would undoubtedly say yes. I mean, think about it. Most of us get nervous with long periods of silence. We've built in just a few in this church service. And I bet y'all are thinking, uh-oh, somebody forgot what they're doing. Somebody lost their place. But no, they're intentional. Silence is intentional. We don't like awkward pauses. We will fill our homes and our houses with the sound of news and NPR and constant watching of Netflix that just puts things on whether you ask for it or not. And what about all those people walking around with earbuds? What's so frightening about silence? Well, the truth is that it just might reveal some things, or uncover some things, or disclose some things. One monk from our own Episcopal monastic community says that silence is the first language of God. Silence is the first language of God, which is to say that silence is a language that God uses to communicate with me and you. Silence is a part of God's being. And I imagine that God spent a lot of time in silence before God decided to speak the world into existence. Silence is often needed to prepare for any creative act, thinking, looking, staring at a blank canvas or blank piece of paper. Silence is simply another way of exercising patience and discipline. So we can't know why the angel Gabriel blessed Zechariah with the gift of silence. Maybe it's because God had put into action another big thing, another part of the ongoing nature of creation, bringing something ultimately creative into the world. And Zechariah needed space. He needed time to prepare his heart and his spirit. So what was the big thing? What was the big thing that God was bringing into the world? How was God continuing creation? Well, God was bringing God's own self into the world. God was bringing God's own self into the world. And it is called the Word. Notice that it's not words or sentences or paragraphs. Word. One singular, perfect word. So the season of Advent is about you and I preparing for this one singular, perfect word. And don't you think, especially now, that humanity could benefit from a long, serious pause? I came across some helpful instructions that I use a lot about knowing when to speak. 3 questions you ask yourself. Does this need to be said? Does this need to be said by me? Does this need to be said by me right now? Indeed, there are times when we need to speak, and we are living in those times. We need prophets. We need people to speak truth into our world. And sometimes we need to speak using words. And sometimes we need to speak using our actions and even a quiet witness. But I know in my heart that times of silence and listening and restraint can serve to create more space in which to hear God in God's own native tongue. You might even call that God's love language. So whatever happens to Zechariah? Well, it was an interesting story. 9 months later, the baby is born, and they're at a naming ceremony in the temple. And they ask, what are you going to name this baby? And Zechariah can't speak yet, so he gets out a pen and paper, and he writes, Zechariah. That's what we're going to name him. And Elizabeth's like, I'm going to take advantage of this. We're going to name this baby John. Elizabeth says, we're going to name this baby John. And the leaders are like, wait a minute, that's never happened before. Name your baby after your daddy. Mary says, or Elizabeth says no. So a new thing was born. Even in the naming of this person, something new is happening. Young John the baby Baptist has been born, and something new is about to hit the road. And only after that was Zechariah able to speak. And what did he speak? That psalm that we just heard sung by our choir. It's a song of praise. It's a song thanking that she loves you. Do you hear what I hear? A singular perfect word is stirring. Let every heart prepare room.